Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today we have with us Azad Najfi. So, welcome, Azad.
Thank you. Thank
And
you for having me here.
And thank you for joining us. My name is Rana Hamdi. I am a member of Deaf Muslims of Canada, and I am the program coordinator. So today we're going to take an opportunity to get to know Azad, ask him some questions, interview him, and hopefully have a chat to learn more about his experience, inshallah. Okay, so to start off with, Azad, if you don't mind, can you please just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit more about your family, your background, your education.
Sure. Thank you, Rana. I was born and raised in Kitchener-Waterloo, here in Canada. Both my parents are deaf. Growing up, I was always involved in the deaf community. I even went to deaf school. After graduating high school, I attended Rochester Institute of Technology. What else?
What about your profession? What do you do?
Most of my professional experience has been working with youth as a child and youth worker, specifically in the mental health services. As you know, there's a wide range of child and youth workers.
Yep.
My specialty was mental health for early age until 18 years of age. Specifically working with deaf, hard of hearing, CODA, which are children of deaf adults. However, recently I switched professions and I'm currently the assistant manager at SLEO, which is a sign language interpreting associates Ottawa at a call center. And that's my professional experience thus far.
Beautiful. Thank you for introducing yourself. Give me a moment here while I'll take a look at my notes. Okay. Next question is with regards to your experience growing up, and specifically with your opportunity learning about Islam. So, for example, growing up, I did go to public school. However, on the weekends, I went to Islamic school, and that's where we were able to learn about how to pray, why we fast, memorizing the Quran, and it was on a weekly basis on Sundays. Usually from 9 to 12, and I'm sure similar non-deaf individuals had similar experiences as me. So I was wondering what your experience was like.
That's a good question. Growing up, okay, wait, let me back up a bit. During my childhood years, deaf access is incomparable to what it is today. Back then, interpreting services were not provided often. There was a lack of awareness regarding the deaf. Not many knew about deaf culture. This has improved since, so growing up, I attended deaf school. I commuted to Milton from Kitchener on a regular basis. And at the deaf school, there was no access to Islamic or religious education. And the reason being is that it was a public school in which many deaf students attended from across the province. Many of different religious backgrounds, so I didn't have the opportunity to learn about my religion, about Islam.
Well, what about like Sunday or Islamic school?
Well, until I was about 7, 8, or 9 years old, my father did find an Islamic school. Although it was not a deaf school, there was one teacher at that school that was willing to learn sign language. That teacher was not fluent, though. I did join their class every Sunday from 9 till noon, but I didn't learn much. She would teach the entire class by talking, and then at the end, she would just spell out a few concepts for me, but it was a struggle. Luckily, I had a couple of friends who would take notes and share them with me. But unfortunately, I did not fully understand their religion because of the lack of accessibility. Regarding interpreters again, back then there wasn't much accessibility, and there weren't many interpreters that understood Islam to be able to interpret it. So, in addition to that weekend school, my parents, because they were also deaf, they were able to communicate with me and thus teach me the knowledge they had. Even then, I wouldn't say I was able to have a full and deep understanding of Islam. Till now, I'm still learning about Islam.
Thank you for sharing that experience with us. It must have been tough to see, other Muslims being able to attend Islamic school and learn, but for you to have no accessibility at all. Thank you. Okay. In your introduction, you mentioned that you used to work as a child and youth worker. Within your experience, did you work with a lot of deaf Muslim children and Muslim families?
My work isn't just providing services to Muslim families. We provide services to a range of families. Having said that, I did work with a few Muslim families, yes. Again, as a professional within that field, I had a neutral position in providing service.
Right.
But what I did notice is that there was a huge difference between the Muslim families and their deaf children.
And are these families deaf or non-deaf?
Well, the majority of these deaf children have non-deaf parents, and there was a major conflict between the Muslim parents and their deaf child. Growing up, the child wants to communicate with with families. They want to be able to use sign language, but many of their parents don't know how to sign, and thus there's a huge conflict that leads to mishaps. A constant conflict between Muslim identity and deaf identity. For example, Muslims have a set of rules and guidelines that they follow. The importance of family get-togethers. There are many times where the deaf child might question those values and not be able to get a clear explanation. Growing up, these deaf children don't have the same access as everyone else, and thus, how can we expect them to understand our values? That's what I've seen in the work that I do, and it must be stopped. There has to be resolution going forward for better communication and for access. Still to date, it's 2021, and this issue has yet to be resolved. I mean, it has improved a bit, but needs a fix going forward.
I can't even imagine the frustration of these children asking questions and just as simple as why do we not eat pork, or how do we pray, and the parents not being able to communicate or explain those values to them. And is this something common that you've seen in families?
Yes, it's common. Due to the lack of accessibility and communication barriers with the families, many deaf Muslims end up no longer interested in learning their religion and get off the path.
You can't blame them.
And thus, as a Muslim community, we must do something. We must support these deaf Muslim children.
What would be your advice to these families? Let's say we have non-deaf families with deaf children. What would be your advice to these families, to the parents? Again, with deaf children, what would you tell them?
For families with children who are deaf, hard of hearing, or losing their hearing, my advice is to accommodate that child's needs. We cannot expect these children to match our expectations without adjusting to their needs. I see many Muslim families with deaf children that need to learn sign language. Communication is essential. If that is disregarded, it turns into a mental health. It impacts that child's overall well-being, and thus impacting their relationship with their families over time, leading them to struggle with jobs.
Their identities as well?
Yes, their identities, the lack of self-confidence. The families then blame it on their child being deaf, when in reality, it's not about the hearing. The main issue here is communication and language. And once you establish those and develop a relationship with your child, they will succeed.
And now, Azad, I know you, mashallah, you are involved in sports, you're involved in the community, you volunteer, you're a professional. Mashallah, you are very successful. What would you say was essential in your success? I mean, in your history, in your past, what was essential to your success?
Basically, I give thanks to my parents. Due to my parents' communication, mashallah, my parents are deaf, so as soon as I was born, I had language due to them. We were able to communicate. That allowed me to carry on with my interactions, and it was all due to communication. It's not about deaf and non-deaf families. The main factor here is language, sign language. And that guided me throughout my life, providing me with these opportunities to succeed. And such a simple solution, communication.
You're right, it is such a simple solution, mashallah. Now, for our Muslim families watching us who don't have any deaf family members, what would be your advice to them? How can they support our deaf community members? How can they welcome our deaf community members into our spaces? What would be your advice to our Muslim families watching us?
Honestly, the deaf and all of you are exactly the same. We're all equal. The only difference is that we cannot hear. That's it. I encourage people to become more proactive about interacting with the deaf. Just learn the language, and from there you can interact with us.
And let's say if people don't know how to sign and they meet someone who's deaf, what should they do? Is there any other way that they can communicate with the deaf?
Accommodate the person in front of you, whatever their preferred method of communication it may be, whether it be sign language or any other way of communicating. I think it's just important to learn sign language.
Right. And today there are so many options for people to learn. There is learning off the internet. There are courses that you can enroll in. Just as simple as being involved within the community and the Muslim deaf community, right?
Right. Also, recently, a few months ago, not too long, here in Ontario, they passed a bill that for all high schools to include American Sign Language as a foreign language that can be learnt and is available.
Oh, wonderful.
So encourage your kids to enroll in these classes and learn sign language. And through that, they will end up meeting deaf members and will be able to communicate with them through sign. Quite honestly, we truly appreciate if you'd learn sign language. There's a wide variety of communication styles within the community, not just sign language. Some can lip read, some can speak, and there's sign language too. It really depends on who you're interacting with. For instance, if we're talking about people who are blind, not all of them have the same vision loss.
No.
Vision loss varies for them. Similarly, auditory loss has a spectrum as well.
Right.
Some can hear, others can't hear anything at all, such as myself. So there's a range, and you just have to accommodate the deaf child.
Wow. Thank you, Azad. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your own experiences with us and providing our guests with advice. Azad is our first member to be interviewed today, so thank you for joining us, and I hope you continue to join us on every week on Fridays.
Thank you, Rana.